Thank you again for joining us in this weekly series. And it's my pleasure today to introduce Beth Ouellete. Beth's the founder of the Ouellette Group. She's got a very impressive and extensive background and experience. And before I get into that, I just want to say one of the first meetings I had with Beth was back in November when PMI held the first Train the Trainer session. And it had in attendance some of the existing Discipline Agile instructors, and then it had people that were coming from sort of the PMI world. And it was those that had tremendous experience and background, both with PMI as well as training and Agile ways of working. And so that's where I met Beth. I quickly learned just how extensive of a background she had with both PMI, various very senior level volunteer positions, and just how much she knew about things and people within PMI and the value that that part of the kind of the world's coming together brought. And ever since, it's just been a pleasure to continue to interact and learn from her. So she's got lots of certifications again in her bio write-up. She's PMP, PGMP, PDA, PBA. That's a little bit tough to say. But one of the things that I think is well, after that string of letters, that's a lot of letters you have behind your name.
You're forgetting the DA letters. Those are the ones I just got.
And I was going to say, one of the most impressive things is Beth was one of the first people from that original group that not only became a certified Discipline Agile instructor, which in itself is obviously a significant accomplishment, but Beth is also a certified Discipline Agile coach. And there are still very few people in the world that hold both of those certifications. Both are extremely challenging to get, and Beth is one of the very few that has done that. So with that being said, let's kind of get on with today's topic. And what Beth and I thought we would do is bring to light a little bit around what we both see, again, her experience and background with PMI and now really getting into DA, my background and experience with Discipline Agile. And I'm going to open this up by saying one of the very first things that Beth was able to articulate was she was like, wow, I've been doing DA for a long time, right? Most people that do an Agile way of working go beyond, again, a more prescriptive or rigid approach, some of the things that we talked about in the life cycles or Glenn Little talked about in the last webinar. So she was able to realize that she'd been doing DA for quite some time. So Beth, can you provide a little bit more on your background and perspective on things?
I think you really teed it off perfectly. It's been a really interesting journey as I've traversed certainly PMI and the relationship with PMI and the journey I've taken in my career as well, project, program, portfolio work. And doing Agile work. So I felt like I was an orphan child a little bit, but I didn't know it until I found a home with Discipline Agile, because it just made so much sense to me to pick and choose based on the context of the project, the skill set of the team, the intention of the deliverables, to select the appropriate techniques for how we want to work together to deliver value to the organization. And when I realized there was an official tool and it was really cool and logical and it made sense, I was definitely all in. And so I took on a volunteer position with PMI to sort of help bridge the PMI DA worlds a little bit and help the DA executives understand the chapter flavors and vice versa. And through that journey, I realized this is what I wanted to be my next big thing, and that's Discipline Agile, to be part of that community. So I couldn't be more delighted that you've invited me to just talk about this stuff. And I'm so excited to be a part of that certified Discipline Agile instructor and coach pool. It's quite an honor, and it was definitely a challenging journey. So they put me through my paces for sure. Thanks so much, Joshua.
Yeah. So what we've got to talk about today is kind of the good, the bad, and maybe some of the uh-ohs that we're seeing. And Beth, I'll ask you to kind of start off by maybe covering a little bit of what do you see as some of the key benefits of Discipline Agile being acquired by PMI? I know that there was a lot initially in the industry. I mean, there were lots of things in some of the forums as far as, well, that might be the end of DA, or it might stifle a bit of the really great stuff that's in the toolkit. And I think in practice, what we've seen is quite the opposite. So yeah, I mean, from
Absolutely.
your perspective in all this great history with PMI, what do you think the benefits are?
Well, I see the benefits on both sides. A coin has two sides, and I think this does too. So when I think about project management and our community of project managers, Agile was becoming, one of the accepted practices. And it was slower to grow than a project management professional, the PMP, but it was still a part of that picture. And in fact, the body of knowledge has expanded tremendously because they wanted to include those Agile components. And to do that was important because that's the way the world is going. And we need to be more responsive and more agile in how we work. But then to find an organization who really knew how to put their arms around all those Agile practices to help the practitioner to select and make choices and be pragmatic about their approach to what they wanted to bring to their team, really just made so much sense to bring those together. So the power, the synergy that the two organizations bring, I think can be just tremendous.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've seen that's been just so fantastic with what PMI has been doing is the amount of awareness actually globally. I do a lot of virtual live instruction workshops, and I get attendees from all over the world now. So it's been just amazing how much interest that there's been, both at the sort of individual practitioner level. Again, with COVID-19 going on, we're seeing a lot of people that are using some of the time, if they can, to upskill themselves. So there's been really good attendance in a lot of the workshops, but now also seeing interest from organizations that are beginning to look at DA and see how much value it can provide either on their initial sort of or maybe latest journey into adopting an agile way of working at the organizational level, or making improvements on maybe something that they've been trying to get value out of for some time. So that's been another huge benefit.
It's interesting because I was doing an online session a couple of weeks ago, and as one of the practitioners online introduced herself, she said, "We've started a journey with this thing called Discipline Agile at our company." and my content was program management, but it was really cool to be able to see those two worlds come together. And I think we'll just continue to see more of that as we bring the PMI and the DA worlds together and really be able to leverage those synergies and the power that they really have cohesively.
Yeah, I had somebody in one of my recent workshops that actually said that they had attended because they had heard that an organization that they've done work, and they do contract work, that we're going to be looking for people with Discipline Agile certifications. And
nice.
They wanted to put themselves in a position where they'd be a prime candidate to come back and get another engagement. So I think we'll start to see more of that as well, which again, that'll just be wonderful for the community.
So I mean, this is all part of that good that you talked about, right? The growing community, the synergies of two communities coming together, the interest that we're seeing beyond each of the communities, and you just touched on another thing, a career path, a new career path, a new skill set that we could leverage. Tremendous.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think is such a great differentiator as well. I had an opportunity to do a Discipline Agile Consortium webinar, and that was actually one of the differentiators that I actually focused on is the certifications and the path from a career perspective. And most certifications from an Agile perspective, they focus more on leadership positions, right? Team level coaching or product line or being like an enterprise coach, which is still obviously needed, but that's not for everybody. And having professional certifications as a practitioner that's going to be able to have you continue down that path and have additional specialized certifications, in workshops and guidance and so forth is, another huge benefit. And with PMI's resources, I mean, that's something I think the DA community had been hoping and wanting for quite some time. but to be able to have the resources to be able to put those types of things in practice is another one of the really goods. And
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
obviously talk about maybe we'll kind of close out with some additional goods. But what I would like to also hear from you is now, what do you think are some of the maybe the bads that are kind of out there, or are there any? And
Well,
don't forget, I'm going to ask you an uh-oh as well.
yeah, he's good. All right. So for all my friends, I see some folks from literally across the globe. So thank you guys for joining um, today. But it's it's a new relationship, right? It's a new relationship, and the Tuckman model talks about forming, storming. There's a lot of differences. We're bringing together two cultures. We're bringing together two skill sets. We're bringing together different membership bases, different bodies of knowledge. And so with that always comes the challenge of how do we integrate? How do we move forward? If anybody's been a part of a merger acquisition on the corporate side,
Yeah.
you know, it's unbelievable. I was a victim of a merger acquisition, I might say, because I was flying on Continental and I was in San Francisco the day that they switched the systems to integrate, and none of us could check in. So it was now officially United, but nobody could check in. And so people were doing manual prints and checklists because that integration wasn't as smooth as they had hoped. And so I think we are feeling a normal growing pain and integration pain. Some of the things that come up, the membership. Why do I have to join two members? Well, I know that they're working very hard to hopefully very shortly remedy that so that DA and PMI come together as one. So that's a challenge. How do the certifications integrate? Are the bodies of knowledge going to be separate? Well, we have a brand new way of working book that was just published. So that is the body of knowledge. You're going to show it? You got it right there?
I am. I'm going to show it right
Mine's
here.
in the other room. I was reading it. so some of those things we're seeing. So the book that Joshua just held up is evidence of that path forward and the integration that is working. And so some of it, you know, we're in this expectation zone of I want it now. It should be done yesterday. But it's still, even though we're agile, some things still have a little bit more hybrid or traditional approach to how they have to get done.
Yeah.
And so we have to embrace all those different ways of working for all the different components that do need to come together. And I think those have been some frustration points for our members and some challenges. And the good news from my perspective is I'm seeing a trending in a really positive direction where we'll be able to showcase and deliver some things that people feel really good about.
Yeah, and just part of, and there's definitely growing pains, especially like you said, with a merger and acquisition. And it wasn't just the acquisition of the Discipline Agile Consortium; it was also the acquisition of Net Objectives, right? So Al Shalloway and Jim Trott, they came over to PMI as well about the same time, and so it's quite a bit of an undertaking. And sometimes what I find in again delivering workshops is, well, that term or the definition of that term is not the same as what I just got done studying for the PMP exam. No, there are some differences. And you might need to keep that in mind for taking an exam or when, providing the right context depending on what situation you're in. But over time, I mean, we're seeing that, so much progress has already been made. And what I try and say is there will be lots of little things like that will get better. Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
And there are some things that maybe will always remain a little bit different, and they should.
Yeah, agreed. I know there's always a question about certifications and standards, and PMI has had a cadence with their deliverable because they're an ANSI standard. So there's certain things that have to be very traditional and timed. And so the standard goes through the process that it does. If you're familiar with that, with the volunteer reviews and the final sign-offs and the final delivery, and then there's a time frame between that standard and the exam reflecting the standard. And so we're bound to continue to experience some of those things as well. I know that question has come up with the new book that you just held up. And so So, we're dealing with that very similarly to what we've dealt with in the PMI standard cadence and exam cadence. So to me, that's to be expected. And that's part of the process that we know is just, those are steps in the process, and we work with them and do the best we can as we go through that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things that I'm seeing that, again, it's more of just sort of maybe level setting, especially for a lot of the training workshops is, from a DA perspective, those training workshops were always centered first and foremost around providing awareness and, and something you can take back to your team, your organization, put into practice and start doing something differently to produce value better. And yes, there are certifications, there are workshops also to help enable that, but that's always been a secondary benefit.
Mm-hmm.
There are times where I'll get going with a workshop and some of the initial questions are, well, you're going to teach us exactly how to pass the
exam. Is that on the test?
Like, right? I'm going to help prepare you and point you in the right direction for the additional investment and time you're going to have to make by doing some studying. Yeah. And hopefully you're going to leave with something very valuable you can take back. But yeah, this is not just you're going to come to this, this workshop, and I'm going to teach you like, this is a question, this is a question, this is a question. Mm-hmm. So that's also, again, a little bit part of maybe just the integration and the growing pains as well.
I think that's a very important differentiator, though. I think it's very important. And my philosophy as I did any kind of workshop was, what can you actually take away and use today? How can you improve what you're doing? How can you make better your project work and what you do? And I think that's like a core principle that resonates with being awesome and optimizing flow and context counts and all of those things that I think is so valued. That's one of the value propositions, in my opinion, that Discipline Agile brings to the table. Yeah. Because I can't go to one of your workshops and not walk away with some ideas of what can I improve on? How can I do things better?
Yeah.
So I think that's vital.
So there is a question in the Q&A. There's a few which we're going to get to, but there's one from John that's asking, and I'm going to tie this into maybe what could be an but let's see what you think, and I'll share what I think. The question is around, what about the PMI ACP certification, and where does that fit? So John, that's a really good question. That comes up quite a bit.
So the ACP certification is our Agile Certified Practitioner that PMI has had for some time, in case you're not familiar with that acronym. And so the ACP certification, as far as I am aware, and my understanding, and I did reach out and validate a couple points on this, is not going away. And that certification is very focused on Agile and Lean practices. And with the certification, there is a requirement to show a certain amount of experience, right, with your application to that. So that's a very focused certification. When you think about transitioning to the Discipline Agile side of the house, the Certified Discipline Agilist is sort of the basic. I equate it, if you're a PMI person, I equate it to oh no, I can't think of it. Not the PMP, the CAPM, CAPM, there we go. Woo, the CAPM. As the basic, which is, the content, you understand what it means, but you don't really have the experience. When we take it to the next DA certification, the Discipline Agile Lean Scrum Master, it includes Agile, it includes Lean, it includes Discipline Agile, it includes way of working, it also includes Lean governance on top of that, and governance for guided continuous improvement, as well as the experience in those things. And so to me, I see them as maybe a stepping stone, or even a preference, a choice for the practitioner. If I want to focus just on Lean Agile, I can go with the ACP and be a very happy camper. If I want to add some of the guided continuous improvement, if I want to add that Lean governance, if I want to really understand the way of working that Discipline Agile brings to the table, I definitely want to take the next step. And those are steps I chose. So I chose to take those steps, to go for those certifications and take those stepped approaches.
Yeah, yeah, and that's again that sometimes it almost comes up as an uh-oh. Again, you know, whether it's, you know, training workshops or some of the other, I've had the privilege of delivering overviews of DA to some of the PMI chapters, and that the question of ACP and is it going to still be around and where does it fit and why would we need to do both? So yeah, as time progresses a little bit more, I think we'll see a nice fit there. There's another question here, and I'm going to try and pronounce the name correctly. So it looks like it's Cassandra Rich. And the question is, who came up with the certification names? Let me just say
Not
that,
me.
yeah, not me either. But I will say that, yes, there has been a lot of discussion, I think, both within sort of the instructor community and some feedback on the naming. And Discipline Agile Lean Scrum Master or just Lean Scrum Master, when you first kind of hear it, it sounds a little wordy, but I can say that the more you say it, it kind of begins to roll off the tongue. And you get to the point where you can say DALSM pretty quickly. And one other interesting observation that, again, somebody recently made was, it was somebody who did like to have certifications that were very hard to achieve, so very well recognized. And he says sometimes the longer or the more number of letters that's in a certification, the more impressive it looks after your name. I don't really know if I would agree with that or not, but it was an interesting observation. Yeah, nonetheless.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, I'm seeing a couple things in the question pod. I think you're reading questions from the chat pod. Mike Alexander is asking, I think this might apply to people globally. If a company were exploring DA, would they be more or less likely to implement post-COVID if they had a restructuring? If less, how long to adopt or normalize?
So my opinion would be more. And one of the reasons, so I'll answer and give my thoughts on that, because that's a really good question as well. I mean, these are all really good questions. But yeah, so one of the things, again, that DA has been, I think, more of a leader in is the recognition that there isn't one way to do Agile. And some of the options that are within, for instance, the team level process goals, right? The ones that are bolded for, you know, smallish teams and pretty straightforward context. There are lots of options that support beyond a co-located small team. There are partially distributed, fully distributed, and then there's options that you might be choosing based on having a fully distributed model. So what I would say is that there's been good discussions that I've seen coming out of, well, DA supports a lot of how we have to work now, right, in this situation with COVID. And coming out of it, I think that whatever the new norm kind of evolves into, there'll still be a lot of people that are going to want to work from home, right? I mean, it's more cost effective for organizations, for people that have areas in their home that they're able to conduct something like this, right? I mean, we're both in our homes right now. We'll see probably more remote workers where they are still participating in that virtual live kind of format. So DA really fits that and supports it very well. And my expectation is that would be, again, another differentiator from selecting a way of working or improving the way of working that you might already have gone down a path with. What do you think?
I totally agree. To me, this would be the time to start the conversation. We could get people on board with training virtually with no problem whatsoever, and get those choices out there so that the teams could start to improve what they're doing with something that makes sense for them.
Yeah.
I think now's the time. Absolutely.
So we do have, there's more questions in the chat, and there's more questions in the QA, which we'll put a blog entry together and do our best to answer those. I've got one final question for Beth before we do our wrap up. We're getting pretty close here on time. So Beth, one of the things that I'd like to get from your perspective is, what do you think some of the the key steps that practitioners can start doing now, right? Like what's a takeaway or for anybody that's in attendance, sort of a, a plan of action that you would see or that you recommend?
Well, I can give you what I did. Well, and it worked, and I've suggested it to others, and it seems to be working. The first thing is educate yourself,
Yeah.
right? If this is something that seems intriguing, really go out to the Discipline Agile Consortium website, Discipline Agile Delivery website, look at some of the information there. There's a lot of free, really valuable information that upscale your knowledge base, frankly, from that. So I would do that first. I frankly bought the Wow book.
Yeah.
I also got the executive guide because I wanted to get that perspective. So I did a lot of self-study and reading. And then my next step was to put myself into some training, formal training, and then prepare. As I was doing that though, every opportunity I had, I found myself, it wasn't even conscious, but I found myself having conversations about ways of working, or what life cycle are you using, or are you using MVP as appropriate in that way you're using it? And I started finding myself coaching folks without even being invited to, frankly, so you're not supposed to do that, but but I couldn't help myself. So educate yourself, get formal education, get the books, do the reading. And even on home projects, even on community projects or church projects, you can actually adopt this. If you're a chapter leader out there, you can use it for your chapter events and chapter projects. It's very cool. It's very logical, and it makes the whole team feel awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Beth, it's been a pleasure having you join me today. I really appreciate it. And like I mentioned, we'll do our best to go through both chat and QA. Again, I see some really good questions there and things that we'll be able to answer. I'd like to thank, again, everybody for joining and staying with us. Next week, I've got Lawrence Wood. Lawrence Wood is heading the DA transformation at William Hill. A very, very large scale adoption of Discipline Agile. He'll be able to share some insight into why DA was selected, why some of the other Agile ways of working that were tried in the past possibly led them down the path or the point of the decision to use DA. So once again, thank you and hope to see you next week.
Thanks, Josh. It's been great. You guys all go out there and be awesome.
It'd be awesome. Thanks, everyone.